February 19th, 2025. My review of reading Leviticus 9, 10, and 11, reading the Bible in a year, chronologically. So, in Leviticus 9, it got me when I read that the Israelites were to present these offerings to the Lord because the Lord will appear to you today. And it wasn't that they had to present these offerings to get the Lord to appear. This was to be in response of that news. So keep that in mind. A lot of things that we do are to please the Lord and are to be pleasing of the Lord, not to make something happen. The Lord's going to do what he's going to do. There's things that he promises because of what we do. For instance, by honoring our father and mother, we will have a long life. Trying to think of some other things that really there's a give and take sort of. And some of that is not necessarily the Lord doing it. Some of the things that he talks and tells us to do, just like being nice to people, being kind, being forgiven, those aren't necessarily because of the Lord doing something. It's because he wrote nature. He wrote the way things are. And this is kind of one of those things. This is not for us to do something to get something. It's we're presenting these offerings to the Lord because the Lord is going to appear. That's one thing that stuck out to me in this reading, pretty big. Another one that stuck out to me, the glory of the Lord appeared to the whole community by fire blazing forth from the Lord's presence and consumed the burnt offering. That was pretty neat. That's a pretty awesome thing for God to have done, to show them. And the people responded by celebrating and having great joy to have experienced it. Again, I found that very neat. But it also shows us that the glory of the Lord appearing is something special that the Lord does. And doesn't mean that the glory of the Lord isn't present. It's just he chooses when to appear. And that's something to keep in mind. Then we get the sin of Nadab and Abihu. Because they offered the wrong kind of fire, they weren't paying attention, and they did the wrong thing, and they were burnt, done, gone. Fire came down and burned them up. God was mad, said, hey, I will display my holiness because I am holy. Don't get that wrong. God is loving and just, but he's also holy, and he tells us to do things. He expects us to pay attention. He's not over us saying, you do this or else, but he does make the point. He uses this story to make that point, uses the sins of Nadab and Abihu to make that point that he is holy. That's what he's making. Should we be fearful of our lives every time we make a mistake? No, that's not how God does it. But he was very specific. And then if you read back over and over and over again, he explained how the offering is supposed to take place. Here, this is a repeat of how the offering is to take place, and yet they did it wrong. That's how God did it. This doesn't mean it's always going to happen that way, but that's how he did it. We see that in the account of Acts with the I think of their names, but the husband and wife that present the offering, that they didn't have to give. They chose to give, but they chose to keep some back and present it as they were giving the whole offering. And that's another place where we see the Lord strike them dead. Like, boom, done. And obviously that doesn't happen with those kind of sins always, but in those cases it does. It did, to make that point. God is holy, and he makes those decisions. Just moving on in Leviticus 10:9, you and your descendants must never drink wine or any other alcoholic drink before going into the temple. And again, you must distinguish what is sacred and from what is common, and what is clean and unclean, kind of the deciding. It's not saying don't ever do that. It's terrible and wrong. He's just saying, when you come to me, be sober-minded, be completely sober, be reverent, be respectful of who God is when you're serving Him. And it's not saying not to do it; it's just saying don't do it when you're doing this, when you're in that capacity. Then we get this kind of the strange exchange between Moses and Aaron, where Moses' two others, so the remaining sons, they don't do quite as they are supposed to. Again, these two boys didn't do quite, men actually, it's not boys, men, don't quite do things right. They were supposed to eat of the sin offering in the most holy place, and that was supposed to do this. And Moses called, "Why didn't you do this?" And Moses says, and Aaron says, "Wait a minute, Moses. Today my sons presented both their sin offering and their burnt offering to the Lord, and yet this tragedy has happened to me. If I had eaten the people's sin offering on such a tragic day as this, would the Lord have ever been pleased? So why should I celebrate?" And Moses said, "Oh, well, yeah, okay, I kind of get that. I'm satisfied." Is that how that went down? Kind of wonder. They also, to the point of Moses, like, man, we just saw this, and now you guys are, like, screwing around with us? Don't do this. Like, but Aaron kind of put it in perspective. Man, they've lost their brothers. I've lost my son. Are they really hungry enough to eat all this food? They've got to eat all this? Really, Moses? Come on. Moses, oh, yeah, okay. Is that how that went down? I don't know. It's just kind of that strange thing. And then we get into the clean and unclean animals. So the animals that chew the cud, eat grass. That's and ones that aren't, and they list them out, what is and isn't. And again, that's for the ceremoniously clean and unclean. And traditionally, we ignore this based on what God shows Peter in a dream, and then again later on where Paul says, "Don't worry about those things." But we still have to pay attention to what we're eating and how we're eating, not for the Lord's sake, but for our own sake. So something to keep in mind. But that's my review of Leviticus, would that be 9, 10, 11?